Chapter 68, Calistan Canyon. Sunday, August 2nd, 2308. Ashley flew down the paths, making her way toward the far side of the neighborhood. In her excitement, she overshot the street leading to the security house and drifted too far down into the canyon. She needed to go uphill. The kite wasn't helping anymore. The fall had drained the charge and she wasn't able to push it up the steep canyon walls. It was shredded. While it would be fine for riding downhill, that wasn't helping now. She needed to cross the canyon and go up the other side. Ashley knelt and disconnected the kite from the board. She collapsed the whip and folded up the sail. The kite had saved her life, but it was worthless to her now. She wrapped the sail around the mast and tied it with a bit of guideline. She stuffed the whole mess into a 50-gallon trash can at the intersection of two trails. Returning to her board, in the middle of the path, Ashley had the intense feeling of being watched. She knelt to tie her shoe, scanning the trees and the path around her. She saw no one and discovered that her shoe did indeed need to be tied. When Ashley looked up, she saw Oscar, the Dunkirk's cat. What was he doing out here? Ashley turned to grab her board and found Bobby Dunkirk standing just down the path from her. She couldn't understand how he'd gotten behind her, but there he was, dressed all in white, and he was staring at her. Oscar had come with him. Ash noted how much Bobby had changed since she'd seen him last, weeks ago. His hair was slicked down close to the scalp, and his clothes were all white, clean and pressed. He looked as if he were ready for picture day at school. Bobby's expression was also quite formal. No smile, his hands folded behind his back. This was not the same boy she had known. This Bobby was different. He seemed more adult than most adults did. "What happened to Jack?" Bobby asked, without any sort of greeting. "He died," Ash answered. It was the very next day, wasn't it? Ashley found herself strangely calm. Yes, it was the next day. "Do you miss him?" Bobby asked. "Very much," Ashley answered. There was something eerie about Bobby, from his dead white suit to his ultra-smooth demeanor. He didn't seem drugged. In fact, he seemed wide awake. "I need your help," Bobby said without a pause. "My help?" "You were there that day in the canyon, when it all started. It touched you. I can tell. You're the only one who can help me." "What are you talking about?" Ashley asked. She knew he was talking about the Micronics, the prototype in her pocket, the same way she'd known her father was involved when Jack died. Oscar seemed oblivious to it all. He sniffed the grass and weeds, watching everything and nothing. "He's after me. He killed them, and now he's after me." Bobby looked up the hill toward their street. He sounded a little more normal, but the words he was saying were disturbing. "Who's after you?" Ashley asked. "My dad. He killed them. He killed so many." "Your dad?" Ashley asked, pulling out Ross's phone. "Do you want me to call the police?" "No, they can't help me. He kills the police. That night you were running, he killed lots of them. You're the only one who can help me. I'm just a girl. What am I going to do against your dad? You have the power. You can stop him. You have to stop him." Bobby was growing more impatient. "You sound crazy, you know that? Please just come with me, Ash. I'm begging you." Bobby had gone from weird monotone creep to panicked and terrified little boy. Ashley almost laughed but caught herself. "Please, Ash." He was almost in tears now. "He's going to kill my mom. Please, you have to help me. He's going to kill them." Bobby paused and composed himself. "Please, just talk to him. Ash, he'll listen to you." "Why do you think he'll listen to me?" "I can feel it. You're different. When the man fell, you found something. You found something and it's in your pocket right now. That's why he'll listen. You have all the power. You can cure him." Bobby seemed more normal now than Ash had seen him so far. He sounded okay. He was a little keyed up, but he wasn't doing his weird zombie monotone and he wasn't panicking. "What do you mean cure him?" "Like you cured me," Bobby said. "When?" Ashley asked. "Just right now," Bobby answered. "Everything will be all right, I'm sure of it. If you just come with me, Evan and Ann and my mom will all be okay. If you talk to him, he won't hurt them." Ashley walked forward and put a hand on his shoulder. She looked Bobby in the eye. "It's going to be okay. I'll help you." Bobby calmed down. "I have to show you, and then you'll understand," Bobby said. As Bobby walked through the forest, Ashley followed on her board. Her hand found the hard metal rectangle nestled in her pocket. Somehow she was not reassured by its flat texture under her fingertips. Ashley stood with Bobby atop a small rise, past where the old asphalt street stopped. They stood, looking at the side of the modern art fiasco Bobby called home. Ash could see her own house, just down the road. Ash looked over at Bobby. He was terrified. She felt awful for having left him in the forest that night a few weeks ago. It would be difficult to say that Bobby was okay. Ash didn't think he'd ever been normal, but he seemed better at the moment than when she'd run into him 10 minutes ago. Bobby lived in one of the most expensive homes for miles. The white structure stretched out into the canyon, vast and angled. The rooms intersected in odd arrangements, walls and ceilings set together in disturbing ways, resulting in massive amounts of wasted space. For a prosperous slumlord and art connoisseur, Ashley felt Mr. Dunkirk had exhibited zero taste in choosing the family domicile. Ashley hadn't seen Bobby's older brother Evan since the Pierce incident, and she rarely saw Anne outside of family barbecues. This summer, the Dunkirks hadn't thrown any of their trademark parties. Mrs. Dunkirk loved to host giant events, inviting hundreds of people. Shirley worked as a professional coordinator, served as head of the PTA, and was a member of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. She planned school field trips, coordinated weekend outings to amusement parks, and organized multiple family gatherings at local restaurants. The Dunkirks also had a habit of slipping away for fancy trips. Upon their return, the neighborhood kids would be tortured with story after story about how they went tiger hunting in India or fishing for giant carp off the Sea of Japan. And did you know that in Japan they have red dragonflies? Bobby would go on, repeating the same trivial facts day after day. Ash found their familial enthusiasm nauseating. Her family never took vacations. Ashley's father rarely took breaks of any kind from his work. As a result, Ashley hardly knew him. But as her mother put it, he made the sun shine and the grass grow. If your father stopped going to work, the world would fall apart. Small comfort, even when she believed it. Now her world had come crashing down. Her parents no longer existed. She had lost her brother. This was a whole new world she was living in. Here, the rules were different. Bobby reached into his back pocket, produced a key card, and handed it to Ash. "Is there a code?" she asked. "No, just swipe it. Go in through the back." "Look, Bobby, I'll go in there. I'll check on your family. But I want you to understand, it might already be too late. If your mom is in there, if she's hurt, I'm calling the cops, okay? If anyone is hurt, it's 911, images attached. Please, just check, okay?" Ashley rode her hoverboard right up to the back door and leaned it against the house. She used the key Bobby gave her and entered the kitchen. Chapter 69. Martin Dunkirk at home. Sunday, August 2nd, 2308. Inside the house, everything was white. From the walls to the furniture, it was all white, off-white, or a tranquil blue-white. Only the floors were not white. The kitchen was a deep maroon stone. The hardwood floors of the living room and stairwell, an earthy variety of mountain lion, a pale sandy gray. Ashley noticed the trim of the home, crown moldings, runner boards, the railing on the stairwell, all bone-bleached, smooth wood. By the time Ashley had crossed the kitchen, she'd picked up an odd, coppery smell. She breathed shallowly, looking for an abandoned sandwich or forgotten plate of food, anything that might contradict her overwhelming instinct. A sound came from upstairs. Movement. Oscar meowed behind her. He'd slipped inside and was now contentedly cleaning a paw. Another sound came from the second floor. Heavy lifting. Ash moved down the short hall from the immaculate kitchen and into the main foyer. She prepared to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. Bright crimson streaks stained the impeccably white walls. Mrs. Dunkirk lay at the bottom of the stairwell, her head at the foot of the stairs, white-clothed body curving up over the wide circular staircase. If the fall to her present position didn't kill her, the deep stab wounds to her torso certainly did. Ash heard Oscar drinking water behind her in the kitchen. The bright crimson stains stood out sharp and crisp. Several handprints and smears marked the railing and stairwell around Mrs. Dunkirk's body. Ash felt guilty for having disliked her so much. No one deserved to be butchered on the stairs like that. Behind her, Oscar crunched his food into bits before swallowing. Ash turned to her right and discovered Evan's decapitated corpse sprawled across the white downstairs couch. Neatly placed on the coffee table, his head sat in a pool of blood and plasma. It looked altogether different from Mrs. Dunkirk on the stairs. The blood was not so scattered about. There were no bloody prints around the corpse. Evan's sprawled body was also dressed in white from head to foot. Ashley suspected perhaps there had been some family photo scheduled, because this was not Evan's normal attire. The killer had grabbed Evan by the hair as he sat on the couch and cut his head from the body. It had been done with a significant amount of surprise. After decapitating his son, Mr. Dunkirk, Ashley realized there was no reason to guess about it anymore, had chased his wife Shirley to the front foyer, where he got a bit more aggressive. Ashley snapped a couple pictures of Mrs. Dunkirk, followed by a couple of Evan. She attached them, typed "murder" in all caps, 1826 Calistan Way, and dialed 911. Forgetting the phone, Ashley found her eyes drawn to the top of the stairwell. Mr. Dunkirk stood, watching her, from the open two-story flight. The short, overweight, and usually harried businessman had gone triumphantly mad. Previous to this moment, Martin Dunkirk always appeared perfectly combed, coiffed, and perfumed. He was usually attired in garments worth an affluent banker's yearly salary. Today he looked exactly as Ashley had always imagined him. Drunk, unshaven, a rat's nest of greasy tangled hair, a dirty tank top concealing his massive gut, wrinkled work pants held aloft by a single strange suspender. In his left hand, where Ashley might have pictured a newspaper or a donut, Martin held a large, finely serrated kitchen knife. The young girl and the homicidal murderer stared at each other. Martin blinked first, and Ashley sprinted for the kitchen door, pocketing the phone as she ran. Behind her, she heard the blood-crazed lunatic thundering down the stairs. The pursuit went silent for a brief moment as he leapt to clear his wife's corpse. Then he crashed on, chasing after her with a series of hard thuds. As the Micronics naturally monitored all frequencies, Captain Snow and Chief Warrant Officer Reed both heard the 911 call and saw the images Ashley forwarded to the cops. Snow was still looking at the images as Ashley burst from the house. Ashley slammed open the back door. Outside, momentarily blinded by the afternoon sunlight, she panicked and made her first mistake, sprinting across the deck and forgetting her hoverboard leaning against the house. She ran for the low adobe wall where the property met the sloping canyon as Mr. Dunkirk barreled down the kitchen hall after her. Bobby was nowhere to be seen. Ash cleared the wall as Mr. Dunkirk burst through the kitchen door. As she ran, she heard him pound his way across the wooden deck and down the stairs. The heavy steps went quiet as he crossed into the foliage-carpeted dirt. Anna and Reed were both caught off guard by the fleeing Ash and pursuing Dunkirk. Anna immediately chambered a round and fired on Dunkirk, but missed. She fired twice more before he vanished into the undergrowth. Anna signaled Reed, gesturing for him to flank Dunkirk at ground level from the east so he'd be outside her field of fire as she lined up a shot from the air. Ash recklessly sprinted down the paths, her feet hardly touching the ground. She didn't know she could move so fast. If she fell, the impact would fracture bones. She morbidly joked with herself that if ballet didn't work out in the long term, she might follow her mother's footsteps and enjoy a career running track. Well over 200 pounds, wide-shouldered and thick-necked, Marty Dunkirk hurled himself after her. She didn't risk looking back, but she could hear him gaining ground. She could hear the knife-wielding hand chopping and hacking at obstructing vegetation. The leafy trees obscured the sky overhead as paths cut through the forest. Ashley ran, downhill mostly, turning often enough to slow down and avoid losing control altogether. She heard Dunkirk fall twice, and then a third time. She thought she'd lost him, but he'd come down the mountainside the hard way, and she could hear him now approaching from a different angle. Ashley ran harder. She heard him burst onto the path behind her. She glanced over her shoulder. He followed, closer than she'd imagined. She accelerated, moving faster, but he kept coming. Ashley took a turn to her right, a slight upward angle, past the glen where Bobby liked to sit with his disciples. Of course, she didn't know that. She slid down a sharp defile, the grass and weeds coming loose under her feet, luckily reaching the bottom without a twisted ankle. To her left, where the defile became narrower and continued up the mountainside, there was an area that had recently collapsed. From her place at the bottom of the stack, Ash could see the bodies, piled one atop another, surrounded by loose dirt. Dozens of bodies, stacked almost 20 feet high. Loose earth poured in between them like mortar. The thick funk of decay and rot hung in the air. Behind her, Dunkirk roared with laughter as he clumsily made his way down the hillside. Ash turned to run but vomited after the first step. She dragged on, stumbling and spitting out the remainder of her lunch as she fled the lumbering psychopath. She took another uphill path, dense with trees and underbrush. She didn't think, she just ran. The mistake hit her too late. The path led to a narrow sliver of high ground, a peninsula with sheer drop cliffs ahead and to both sides. Mr. Dunkirk howled with primal bloodlust as he pursued her. To her back, and both sides, a few sparsely covered feet of dirt was all that stood between Ash and a fall of 40 meters or more. Back down the trail was the only safe way off the sliver of high ground. The sweat-soaked Dunkirk appeared at the mouth of the trail behind her and stalked forward. Ashley backed out further onto the plateau. Dunkirk paused in the shadow of the trees just a few meters away. He hesitated to reveal himself, as the precipice could be seen by any of several residences, as well as passing traffic. Anna waited, her scope fixated on the big man, but the shadows, the heat of the afternoon, and her angle unbalanced the shot. She waited for him to step out of the shadows, and she would have him. Reed watched from a lower position over her right shoulder. With a muttered curse, Dunkirk stepped into the sunlight and raised the knife overhead. Ashley saw bits of green leaf streaked over dried blood. She backed away, moving further out onto the dangerous bit of mountain land. Just as Anna's finger tightened on the trigger, she was hit from the back. She released the trigger. The rifle stayed silent as she tumbled through the sky, trying to get her bearings. Below her, 2 police cruisers filled the sky she'd occupied until a moment ago. The officers in the cockpits were focused on the action below. Utterly invisible, they hadn't noticed her at all. Anna's back ached where the cruiser had punched her, killing her shot. Below, Dunkirk continued forward, but instead of bringing down the knife, he surprised Ashley, leaping forward with a heavy-knuckle backhand, knocking the girl from her feet. So much for don't get hit, Ashley thought. She crouched where she had fallen, just a few inches from the edge. His rings had opened a wicked gash in her brow. Blood ran into her eye. Her head rang like a tower bell. He was so fast, she thought to herself. Sorry about your mom, Dunkirk said. Ashley didn't understand. She looked up at him but didn't reply. It was just a job. Not like what you saw back there. Not like Shirley. That was spectacular. Ashley and Mr. Dunkirk stared at each other. He just admitted to killing her mom. Ash was furious and near panicking. Her emotions were all over the place. But then something happened, and she just shut off. The words of Si-Hing Shu came back to her. It will be at that moment when you are weak, tired, and probably very hurt. That is when you must act to save your life. As Dunkirk stepped forward, she recognized his poor posture. He let his knees turn inward. They were weak, vulnerable. Ashley struck. With her hands planted in the dirt, she kicked at Dunkirk's left knee. The joint gave with a splintering crack. Martin crashed to the ground, screaming. The knife lay between them. Dunkirk clutched at his ruined leg, growling, howling, and snapping at her. With a deep breath, he lurched up. Even on one knee, he towered over the small girl. He reached for the knife. Ashley moved, kicking again. Staying close to the earth, she unleashed a series of horizontal kicks to the large man's face, neck, and chest. Her persistence and coordination unbalanced him. She delivered the last 3 directly to his nose and mouth, stomping the deranged killer over the lip of solid ground and from her sight. She heard him scream until his voice grew obscured by cracking branches, and then silenced by a muffled impact. The knife remained where it had fallen. Ashley stood. Above her, 2 police vehicles hovered, watching. Having just arrived, they were helpless to do anything but witness. She saw the nearest officer grin and raise his fist in salute. Ashley did not wave back or smile. She did not feel victorious. They turned off to land in a nearby clearing. Ash noticed her breathing had leveled out, her heart calm. Now, she finally did feel powerful, capable, and more than just confident. She felt superior. High above the action, Reed and Snow watched the cops land and check on Ashley. That 5th wall, Reed said. Completely intact, Captain Snow answered. Even at the cost of my spine. Reed laughed. Nothing a little blue goo can't fix, right? Thank God for the blue goo, Snow agreed. Chapter 70, Metacron Closing. Sunday, August 2nd, 2308. Later, Ashley sat in the open back of an ambulance parked at the end of the street, out past the Dunkirk house. An EMT checked her vitals. The tech smiled at her. I'd say you look perfectly normal, considering the excitement. Any shortness of breath? Ashley shook her head. The tech removed the sensors and opened a first aid kit. He gestured to her eyebrow and asked her to look up to the right. The tech cleaned the wound and applied nanotape to help heal and regenerate the damaged tissue. You know, that was really brave, he said, looking her in the eye. From what the detectives are saying, you saved a lot of people's lives today. You're a hero. Ashley looked away and lowered her head. I'm no hero. I was scared. I ran. Ashley watched the uniformed officers stretch yellow and black police tape across the Dunkirk property. As the medical tech finished patching up her face, a pair of detectives approached. The older one said his name was Carrick, and that he'd like to talk to her for a couple minutes. He was going to send her back to the station with his partner, Detective Cole, but before that, it was essential that she tell him as much as she could remember. In the distance, Dunkirk was being airlifted from the ravine. Ashley watched the police vehicles winch up the killer's unconscious body. She remained silent. Carrick looked at his partner. They're taking him to our place? Should be, but I'll double check, Cole said, turning away to make the call. Carrick turned back to Ashley. So, Princess, can you tell me what happened? Ashley looked at the man's face. He wasn't being condescending when he said Princess. Her father never called her that. Ash decided she didn't mind. In fact, she kinda liked it. Mr. Dunkirk killed his family, she said. That's whose house this is, with the dead bodies in it? Yes, the Dunkirks. So what happened? Ashley paused for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. Carrick misread her hesitation for distrust. Look, we're here to help you. We need to know what happened. The more you tell us, the more we can help you better. He smiled. It was disarming despite his otherwise gruff appearance. Ashley laughed at the detective's unintended humor. She took a breath. I met Bobby Dunkirk in the forest. He lives here. He said he needed my help, that his dad was going to kill his mom, and would I go in and check? Ashley blinked in the afternoon sun. There was no quick or easy way to explain everything, so she started with the important facts. He's a lot younger than me and he was scared. Where's Bobby now? I don't know. He was gone when I came out. Did you get the pictures I sent? She asked. Carrick looked over to Cole. These? Cole held out the photos Ashley had sent to 911 on his screen. There's more, she said. What do you mean more? More what? Carrick asked. More bodies, Ashley answered. Out that way, she pointed into the canyon. A lot more. Could you show us? Carrick asked. Ashley nodded. It's not far. She climbed down from the back of the ambulance and led the detectives down into the forested canyon. 2 uniformed officers accompanied Ashley and the detectives as they hiked down the trails. 15 minutes later, they stood at the bottom of the stuffed gorge. 2 young officers threw up, as did Detective Cole. Only Carrick held it together, and Ashley, although this was her second time around. Just as the officers managed to regain their composure, Cole's radio went off. Detective Carrick, Detective Cole, you've got feds up here. They'd like a word with you, the officer on the radio explained. They're pretty agitated. Already? Carrick sighed and shook his head. What's that about? Cole muttered, reaching for the handset. They're looking for me, Ashley said. It has nothing to do with you, Carrick replied. 2 weeks ago, my parents were murdered. An hour ago, Mr. Dunkirk told me that he killed my mom. He told me he was hired to do it. He said it was business, and that he'd killed his wife for pleasure. He talked to you? Carrick asked. You didn't tell us that he talked to you. I didn't tell you lots of things. If I'd told you my name, I might be dead already. Carrick looked up at the stack of corpses and remained quiet for a couple moments. 2 weeks ago, huh? He asked after a prolonged silence. And he said he was hired to kill your mom? Carrick asked. One of the agents shot my dad. They were waiting for him. They had the whole house surrounded. You saw them? Carrick asked. Ashley nodded. This morning they caught my little brother. She was beginning to tear up. Carrick gestured for the 2 officers to spread out, guarding the paths leading into the little clearing. Once they were out of earshot, Carrick knelt to meet her at eye level. Well, then your name has to be Ashley Fox, doesn't it? Ashley didn't answer, but became much calmer. She realized that she had no reason to consider herself safe, surrounded by these 4 men. For all she knew, they were every bit as dangerous as everyone else she'd encountered recently. Carrick stood up straight. He looked around the forest, not at the pile of corpses, but at the trails leading to and from their position. He scanned the tree lines and the horizon, looking for anything out of the ordinary. We heard about your parents, he said. Me and Cole here. We're homicide detectives. That means when someone turns up dead, they call me or one of my friends. It's not as if you can call some other police department. There's only one. You could say we've got a monopoly on solving murders. So even if the victim is a famous whatever, it's all the same cleanup crew. When we don't get a call on a double homicide, like what happened to your parents, We just know something's rotten somewhere. Oh, we heard about it. The feds are required to file paperwork with the state in order to clear it with the Attorney General. They filed your address. We got notified after the fact. We should have been there. Urich looked up to the towering gulch of limbs and dirt, and then back to Ashley. So what I'm telling you is, I believe you, and I'm going to order my partner to believe you. He has to do whatever I tell him. We're going to help you, but you have to help us too, okay? Ashley nodded. Tell him everything. Don't leave anything out. Ashley realized Detective Urich was about the same age as her father, maybe a little older, maybe the age of Mr. Dunkirk. She also realized the heavily muscled detective could eat Mr. Dunkirk for breakfast. My partner's going to take you back to our office. You stay right next to him. You tell him anything you think may be significant. We need to find out who's behind all this. I know who it was, Ashley said. It was National Intelligence Director Joseph Stanwood and Deputy Director Rudolph von Kalt. Urich turned to Cole. Take her back to the station. Get her statement. Don't you want to be there for that? Cole asked. Sooner the better. I'm going to be here for a while, and we need her on record now. Don't file, just take it and sit on it. Urich looked to Ashley. He took the time to kneel again. Urich held up his finger and looked around at the other people. He pointed at Cole. Tell him everything. Then he pointed to the other officers just out of earshot. But when there's people around, not a word, Ashley agreed. Urich nodded and stood. She's just another juvenile witness. Confidential identity, need to know only, like any other juvenile, nobody special. Don't let her out of arm's reach. Handcuffs if necessary. Understood? Cole nodded. I'll go back up this way with the uniforms. Once you get out of this mess, just call the car over to you. I'll put it on remote once I get up there. It took 15 minutes to get down here, so give me 20 or 30 to get back up. Don't even call it for an hour. If the spooks see our cruiser pull out empty, they'll know something's up. What the hell are we going to do out here for an hour? Cole asked. Well, I'd appreciate it if you'd get the hell out of Dodge. What's an hour? I just don't want the car taking off 2 seconds after I walk away from it. They're feds, but they're not stupid. You can just call a cab. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Are you a complete jackass, James? Why not just race me back and hand her over? Call a cab? Sorry, I wasn't thinking. I don't have any coffee, but wait. Oh, here's a cup full of Wake the Hell Up. Despite the cruel nature of his words, Urich was half joking. Cole nodded. Okay, no cab, I get it. Urich rolled his eyes and smiled. He looked to Ashley and raised his finger to his lips. Then he looked at the 2 uniformed officers and said, Same goes for you. What you saw here today, you take it to the grave, understand? Direct order. The patrolman nodded. If Urich had some hidden agenda, Ashley thought he was doing a marvelous job of disguising it. Deputy Director von Kalt stood at the center of the maelstrom. The agents infested the crime scene, questioning and badgering the municipal investigators. He could smell the girl, but something was off. She had been here just minutes ago. He could feel the presence of the micronics, but there was something else, something broken, fragmented. He was better, greater. He was the Metacron. He was the power of the 40,000. The child was only 1. Detective Urich crested the hill with the uniformed officers. One of the crime scene techs directed him over to the federal agents, standing near the cruisers. Where is she? Von Kalt demanded, not even waiting for proper introductions. You mean he? Suspect's been taken into custody. She is extremely dangerous. We believe this child has been in contact with terrorist organizations. She has information that is vital to national security. I'm sorry, but you must be confused. We're investigating multiple homicides here. You feds are so used to muscling in. You must have just gotten your parties mixed up. Urich moved to walk past, but von Kalt drew his weapon. He kept it pointed at the ground. I'm Deputy Director von Kalt of the National Security Agency. This is a matter of national security. Von Kalt then raised his pistol to Urich's face. Every officer at the crime scene drew their weapons and pointed them at von Kalt. Urich smiled. Von Kalt didn't need the multiple surveillance angles on the Metacron to see that he was outnumbered. Then he smelled a third scent on the breeze. Something different. Despite the dozens of weapons in his face, he looked across the canyon. Bobby stood watching them from a nearby rise. He was still wearing his all-white suit. Oscar sat at his feet. Von Kalt could not see the power Bobby held, but he knew it was there. He lowered his weapon. I'd like to speak to that witness, he said. Von Kalt waved to his new crew of agents and pointed at the little boy in the white suit. Go, he ordered. The agents set out in the direction of the small hilltop. Bobby turned and walked from the rise. Oscar remained where he'd been sitting, untroubled by the boy's exit. Urich nodded, and several officers set out to assist or interfere with the federal agents attempting to intercept and interrogate Bobby. All anyone found was Oscar, who happened to wander across their path sometime later. Chapter 71. Faith Without Works. Von Kalt returned to Stanwood's Angel City office after being utterly unsuccessful in the canyon. The news stream from Calistan Way played on the wall-mounted display. The reporter's commentary on the grisly procession of white plastic body bags being pulled from the canyon was thankfully muted. Stanwood was speaking to President Conway on his desk terminal. "I completely understand, sir. I hope you do, because nephew or not, I can't protect you from this." "Yes, Mr. President. This could take down my entire administration. If that happens, I promise you, Joseph, you will pay the ultimate price." "I'll take care of it, Mr. President." "You do that, Joey. You do that." The terminal clicked off. Stanwood grabbed his Terrellium jacket, and with his newest accessory, a silver-handled cane, he limped past Von Kalt. "What do you need the coat for? It's the middle of summer," Deputy asked. Stanwood ignored him, but Von Kalt followed anyhow. "I told you Dunkirk was a mistake," he muttered, unable to help himself. "He wasn't the only one," Stanwood replied. Cole let Ashley take the lead as they hiked out of the forest. She headed for a street that ran parallel to her own, but went up the opposite wall of the canyon. They saw no one as she and Detective Cole walked up the block, soon arriving at their destination. The house was at the apex of the hill, facing the open canyon. Ash was worried that she wouldn't recognize the structure from the front, but it wasn't difficult. "I came to get proof," she told him. "This is where it is. When I ran into Bobby in the forest, this is where I was coming." "And what is here?" Cole asked, looking at the imposing yet abandoned structure. A layer of soft, fine dirt, blown by the wind, covered the driveway and walk leading to the door. "I don't think anyone is home." "I came back for the security footage, and this is where it is," Ashley said. As she walked up the driveway, she was surprised Cole didn't object or move to stop her. In fact, he stayed right next to her. She slipped her hand into her pocket and held the device. She waved her other palm at the front of the access panel. The door chirped, depressurized, and hissed open. Ashley hesitated. She hadn't done anything clever or special. Ashley had no idea why a panel at a house she'd never been to before should recognize her. It was possible the Micronics had done it for her, but she didn't know how. A car screeched to a landing in the driveway behind them. Ash and Cole froze as two suited agents exited the car. They both wore mirrored sunglasses. Seeing Ashley and Cole, the older passenger gestured for his younger partner to calm down. He surveyed the surroundings and respectfully approached. "Hello, Ashley. I'm Chief Warrant Officer Lee." He spoke to Ash, but then extended his hand to Detective Cole, breaking eye contact with her to look over to him. "Detective Cole," he said, and they shook. "How do you know my name?" Ashley asked. "Well, what are you doing at this house?" Lee asked. "You're on my father's security team, aren't you?" Lee nodded and bowed slightly. "At your service." "It was you that Ross saw," Ashley said. "He thought you were the bad guy staking out my house." "Oh, they're here too. Don't be fooled," Lee smiled. "They almost caught you when you stopped by your home. It was only because they pulled one team off to replace them with a fresh crew. You hit the only window in months of surveillance. We were all very impressed. Congratulations. What happened to you guys when they came for my mom and dad? Why didn't you stop them?" Lee gestured for them to enter the residence. He was followed by his partner and waved at the panel. The door closed behind them. "They came here about an hour earlier, arrested everyone. They had warrants with our names. There was nothing we could do. We haven't come back to this location, but we've kept them out too. We have lawyers protesting the entire fiasco. Everything is frozen until it gets settled in court." "I need evidence," Ashley said. Lee waved a hand over the control panel. The sensors recognized his presence and fired up the displays. Everything was still operational, feeding real-time streams of Ashley's house and street. The four motion-sensitive relays were trained on various sections of the property, while the oscillating and static positions displayed focused locations. Several high-powered rifles and large-bore weapons were trained on key positions of her family home. Crosshairs over street-level doors, the front, sides, and even the landing pad, all covered. Lee pulled up the date of the attack. He scanned through the footage, slowing as the rooftop landing pad and front lawn filled with black vehicles and federal agents. "That's them," Ash said. Lee backed up a few minutes and switched through the focal ranges. He found the infrared and panned through the house. Ash saw her mom coming up to the main floor from downstairs. Even though her figure was represented as light, translated by heat in her body, Ashley could recognize her mother's walk. "We've stayed away from the residence since you were taken. We thought you were taken. We've been staking out the neighborhood, your place and here, waiting for something to break." The infrared footage revealed a thick-bodied man entering the kitchen from a door in the back of the house. She watched her mother enter the room, and their glowing silhouettes merged as the intruder pounced. They struggled for a few moments, and Ashley watched liquid heat begin to run down the legs of her mother and the intruder. The white liquid pooled around their feet, spread and faded to a cool purple blue. On the monitors, a streak of light rushed into the room and drove the thick shape of the intruder from her mother's form. Ashley recognized his shape. The new, quick-moving light was her father. The intruder fled through the same door he'd entered. Ashley watched as her father caught her mother, and together they sunk to the floor. More liquid heat pooled around them and then faded. Lee panned over to the side of the house, where the intruder was entering an uninterrupted shot. He switched back to full color, and the image snapped into focus. It was Martin Dunkirk, covered with blood and grinning. Lee scanned forward in time. They watched the federal forces assemble on the front lawn. The front doors stood open. Soon soldiers wheeled out someone in a white body bag, presumably the body of Ashley's mom. Ash watched as her father burst from the house, his hands and shirt front covered in blood. Dr. Fox said something to the lead agent, the man who was obviously in charge. Director Stanwood drew a pistol, raised it, and pulled the trigger. Ashley's father fell, mortally wounded. Lee rewound the footage and turned up the audio. Microphones set on the property played back the words her father said just as he came out of the house. "Joe, you have to help Anna. Please." Then the pistol fired. It sounded so loud it may as well have been in the room. Dr. Fox fell again. Stanwood motioned for the soldiers to pack up his body. They rolled it onto a white frosted body bag and carried it to one of the waiting transports. "We need a copy of this," Cole said. Lee selected the time range, less than 4 minutes from start to finish, and exported a clip. He opened a network browser and copied the clip into a dozen mirrored storage accounts. Lee wrote a network address down and handed it to Ash, who smiled and nodded. "Thank you." Cole fixed one of the live cameras on a hostile argument between Urich and Von Kalt across the canyon. "That's Director Von Kalt," Ashley said. "He's trying to kill me." From overhead, Captain Anastasia Snow and Chief Warrant Officer Reed watched Ashley and Cole leave the security residence. It had been little trouble to eavesdrop on the conversation. Captain Snow found herself conflicted with relief at how events were unfolding and furious about having so little influence. It appeared that the only person who wanted Stanwood dead more than her was her daughter. The cognitive dissonance caused by her simultaneous joy and revulsion at the recent turn of events prevented her from inserting herself. She couldn't explain it and didn't feel compelled to. Thankfully, Reed didn't ask. Ashley and Detective Cole reached the police station a little after dark. Once in his office, Cole logged in and had no trouble locating Ashley's brother Jeff. He was at a juvenile holding facility not far from where he'd been picked up. Cole filed a request for Jeff, a material witness, to be brought up to his office ASAP. The facility supervisor sent Jeff with a young social worker. Unfortunately, they were sent by the way of public shuttle, an hour's ride at least. Maybe two if the shuttle had prior scheduled deliveries. Cole's phone rang. "What's going on?" he asked. He walked over to the printer and pulled a sheet of paper from the tray. "Yeah, it's here. Office of the Director of National Intelligence," it says. "Material warrant for all persons, property, information pertaining to an ongoing investigation into Sixth Gate citizen Dr. Andrew Fox. Matter national security, blah, blah, blah." "Yeah, there's 12 signatures. Name, numbered, and signed." Cole listened for a moment. Ashley could hear frantic yelling from the other side of the line. "What, Dunkirk? Yeah, sure. I'll triple it. Hold on, I'll be right back." Cole set down the receiver and gestured for Ashley to stay put. He rose and left the office. Ashley found herself immediately bored. She picked up the warrant. There were indeed 12 names and corresponding signatures. She opened the drawer to Cole's desk. There were 2 guns, a small revolver and a pistol. Ashley tucked the revolver into her belt and closed the drawer, pulling the shirt over the butt of the weapon. She leaned over to the terminal and pulled up one of the storage mirrors Lee had given her. Ashley downloaded the surveillance file and opened it. She watched it 7 times before the detective returned. Cole paid no attention to the video clip running on his screen and picked up the phone. He's in our wing, strapped to a bed. One leg is just destroyed. We've got 4 guys on him. He's not going anywhere." A large commotion at the doors of the office distracted Cole from the call. He set down the phone. The storm at the other end of the line had just reached them. Chapter 72. Synthesis. It was easy for the small man with the doctor's bag to slip past the chaos. Dr. Cedric Bergstrom moved through the station with intent. The ACPD was beyond overconfident. No one questioned him or even gave him as much as a sideways glance. He reached the holding cell and nodded to the soldiers. They didn't hesitate either, promptly opening the cell for the diminutive doctor. Bergstrom nodded and smiled his thanks, waiting as they closed the heavy metal door. Dunkirk was unconscious. Bergstrom opened his bag and removed several wicked-looking syringes. He pulled out his scanner and slowly examined Dunkirk's shattered body. He'd seen the news clip on his way to the station. Boy, that Ashley, she sure could kick. Dunkirk's body was a mess of superficial wounds, but his legs had taken the worst of it in the fall. Cedric calculated that he'd need to prepare 22 injections to get the boy right. He went to work, filling the syringes with his own proprietary formula, purple, as opposed to Dr. Fox's more famous blue product. "When this is all over, you've just got to come visit me down at the workshop, my old friend." 3 uniformed officers tried to keep out a throng of black-suited agents. They pushed right through Urich and the other detectives, who simply couldn't hold them back. The entire swarm of people flowed into the detective's workspace, filling the open corridors between desks with angry, shouting law enforcement officials. When Von Kalt, who was at the center of the fracas, saw Ashley, he froze and gave her a leering, predatory grin. A moment later he pointed at her and shouted, "This is a case of national security. You are obstructing justice. You are all under arrest." Ashley pulled out the detective's revolver and pointed it at Von Kalt with one hand. The room fell silent. No one moved or spoke, and to Ashley's utter shock, no one raised a weapon at her. Deputy Director Von Kalt didn't say anything. Ashley pulled out the piece of paper. "This warrant says you're after me. You killed my parents and now you want to kill me? You think I'm a threat to national security?" Detective Cole reached down to his computer and hit a button. The video Ashley had opened was broadcast to the wall-mounted screens around the room. The sound silenced the onlookers. Assembled officers and agents watched the footage. They saw Dunkirk emerge from the house, covered in blood. They saw Dr. Fox approach Stanwood, asking for his help. Von Kalt was there, standing next to Stanwood. Dr. Fox called Stanwood by name, and he shot him. The video started again as a second group of agents arrived in the detective's office. He entered with the second batch. It was him, National Intelligence Director Joseph Stanwood. He was there, right in front of her. He was limping and used a cane. Ashley smiled. She folded the warrant and tucked it into her back pocket, moving her aim from Von Kalt to Stanwood and taking hold of the weapon with both hands. Ashley was positioned behind Cole's desk near an open hall door. Cole stood next to her. There were still no guns in anyone else's hands yet. "What the hell is this?" Stanwood asked. "You're just going to let a child stand there, holding all of you at gunpoint?" Over the speakers, a shot was fired. Stanwood looked at the closest screen. He saw the image of himself, standing over Fox's body. Detective Urich stepped forward, confronting Stanwood. "My witness isn't going anywhere with you. Neither is my prisoner. I believe we have plenty of evidence to place both of you under arrest." "Is that a fact?" Director Stanwood asked. "Habeas corpus has been suspended. You're a homicide detective. If you intend to charge someone with murder, you need a body, don't you?" No one replied. "Might I also point out the fact that Dr. Fox violated dozens of international laws and was threatening the state? He was in possession of advanced weaponry that threatened to hold the entire country hostage. The man was a danger to himself as well as those around him. The warrant is legal. Now if you obstruct me in any way, I will shoot you myself. Turn over my prisoners, both children," Stanwood glared at Ashley, "and the Dunkirk." Stanwood referred to Dunkirk as if he were a thing, a weapon, or some sort of monster. The small doors at the far side of the office opened. A uniformed police officer entered first, with another officer close behind. The first man was scared. He'd been struck above the left eye. His forehead was swollen and cut. The holster at his belt was empty. The man behind him, the somewhat mobile Martin Dunkirk, wore a police-issue vest and jacket as he held the young officer with a gun to his back. "Looks like this is as far as we go," Dunkirk said. The officer swallowed. Ashley switched her aim from Stanwood to Dunkirk. The moment seemed to stretch into infinity. Everyone else reached for their weapons now, but it was too late. Only a fraction of a second had passed. The hostage officer was wearing a bulletproof vest, Dunkirk hiding behind him. Dunkirk raised the shotgun. Ashley fired, hitting him in the arm. Suddenly the office came alive as agents fired and dove for cover simultaneously. Dunkirk jerked the trigger, blasting at Ash and Cole, but Urich jumped in front of the shot, sacrificing himself for his partner and the girl. Cole flipped the desk. Ashley swept her hand over 8 light switches, plunging the floor into darkness. As the light vanished, she marked Stanwood's position and scrambled to avoid the officers pursuing Dunkirk. Dunkirk had dragged his hostage down one of the nearby halls. Cole tended to the wounded Urich. He'd taken some of the scatter shot to his arms and shoulder, but the vest had saved him from mortal injury. Von Kalt went with the agents and officers in pursuit of Dunkirk. Ash slipped through the shadows behind the cabinets and desks, until she found herself just a short distance from Director Stanwood. She held the micronics in her right hand and the detective's revolver in her left. The sounds of the pursuit returned. Dunkirk had become ensnared in the famous police department maze and was on his way back to them. They all turned toward the hall where Dunkirk would emerge. Ash crept closer to Stanwood. There was a small credenza between the director and what would be the oncoming pursuit, and he was further obscured by a filing cabinet. As Dunkirk and his hostage backed into the detective's hall, he did a double take, frustrated to realize he'd simply moved in a circle. Ashley leaned out from behind Stanwood, seeing Dunkirk and being seen by him. She glared, taunting him. Dunkirk abandoned his hostage and opened fire on Ash with both weapons, hitting Director Stanwood several times. Ashley had hid behind the credenza and the director. Dunkirk's aim was off due to several police-fired rounds. He replied with blasts from the shotgun. Pursued, the fight raged on, into another section of the station. It had all happened in a singular moment. Stanwood, wearing Terrellium threads, was largely unharmed. He'd gone down, but none of Dunkirk's shots had even drawn blood. At the worst, he might be a little bruised. National Intelligence Director Stanwood clambered to his feet with the help of his cane and was in the process of brushing off his jacket when he first caught a glimpse of Ashley. She had noticed it was the left knee he was struggling with and approached from that side. As he spun to confront her, she stepped forward. Her right hand shot up to his neck, punching the micronics into the left side of his throat. Ash pulled the blade all the way around to the other side of his neck, dropping with the man as he fell to the floor. She stared into his eyes as the breath came out of his throat, making a sad, flute-like sound. "I remember how time froze when I first touched this thing," she said. "I hope you're feeling every last second of this." She watched the light fade from his eyes as his oxygen-deprived system slowly ceased understanding and experience. Crouched low, Ashley had not been seen. Cole and Urich were on the other side of the credenza in the other section of the office. Using the natural cover, Ashley crept out of the detective's wing. She found a restroom and stopped to ditch the gun and wash the blood from her hands. From there, according to the evacuation placard glued to the wall, it was no more than 30 steps to an unguarded stairwell. Ash moved quickly, but without hurrying. By the time her brain realized it had been too easy, it was too late. She was halfway down the first flight of stairs when she saw Deputy Director Von Kalt. He was just standing there, waiting for her. He was holding his gun at his side. He was also holding the second prototype. She could see it. She could feel it. The Metachron. Ashley was still holding the micronics herself. She hadn't retracted the blade. She had washed it in the bathroom, but the matte black edge was still exposed to the cool night air. Ash felt an alien confidence well up from deep within her. She stood up straight and walked toward the man who'd been pursuing her for weeks. Coming down the stairs, they both knew her power. Ashley reached Von Kalt. Saying nothing, she held out her empty hand. Von Kalt could have raised the gun. Instead, he handed her the Metachron and stepped aside. Ashley didn't look at him. She just took the device and walked past. As she reached the landing, she heard him exhale. The sudden shot startled her. His body fell onto the hard metal steps with a resounding thud. 3 floors later, Ashley retracted the blade and pocketed the micronics. She was evacuated right out the front door with dozens of other people. A crowd was beginning to form due to the ongoing chaos, and naturally, no one was being allowed to enter. Not far from the shuttle gates, Ashley spotted a familiar little head, struggling to see above the adults and catch a glimpse of what was going on. Jeffrey and a young social worker watched the building, along with dozens of onlookers. Ashley made her way over to them, gesturing for him to stay quiet. From just a few feet away, Ash nodded and Jeff slipped away from the social worker. She looked like a nice enough girl, but she could cause real trouble for them if she were to insist on delivering Jeffrey to the proper authorities. Jeffrey inched further and further away from the distracted girl. Before long, he just turned and walked away from her. Moments later, the reunited brother and sister were sprinting away from the police station, dodging pedestrians, giggling and laughing, the chaos behind them forgotten.